EAGLES, Eagles.
Welcome in, Eagles fans. Welcome in, Birds 365 fans. A Wednesday edition of Birds 365 here today. We got a good show planned for you. Two good guests coming up on the show. Mike Gill in hour one, Brandon Lee Gouton, BLG, in hour number two. Johnny Mac, how you doing on this Wednesday morning?
Doing well. Yeah. Thanks to Howard Eskin for handing the baton. Thanks, King. But yeah, good. I hope everybody's enjoying their off-season Wednesday.
Hope everybody's staying cool. It is a hot
heat
week.
wave. Heat
depending
wave.
depending where you
It's
are.
summer, when you're my age. Yeah, it's called summer, which is not a bad thing.
Yeah, we'll go right. We'll
We'll
go right to it, though, Johnny Mac. Here's Twiz the Jigga. John, is there any validity to what Eskin is saying? Do we have another Wentz situation?
Well, it depends your definition of validity. From what I heard, and I didn't hear it, so correct me if I'm wrong, Zander, but from what I read, Howard said Carson Wentzing Jalen Hurts, essentially turning into a term to explain what might be going on. And I just said right up, the Eagles didn't Carson Wentz. I mean, people forget the history of it. They had the terrible season. They moved on from Doug. They had the fractured relationship because, Doug benched Carson. Eagles still were working towards running it back with Carson Wentz. When they were interviewing head coaches, Nick Sirianni, Kellen Moore, among their interview candidates, both of them, a lot of the questions were about how you're going to fix Carson Wentz. And then it became clear as time moved on that Carson wanted out. He thought the organization, really dating back to the draft pick of Jalen Hurts in the second round, kind of did him dirty, and didn't want to be here, and kind of forced the issue to the point where the Eagles were like, all right, we got to move on and we got to go in a different direction. So I don't even think the term Carson Wentzing is accurate to describe what the Eagles did to Carson Wentz. So will they do it to Jalen Hurts? No. From the standpoint of you better play better, That's everybody. And anybody could turn in a negative direction in this league. The contract helps. It's very unlikely, even if the Eagles have a poor season, that they're going to move on this quickly from Jalen Hurts. But the more you play to a lesser standard, the more questions there become. And you can see the questions popping up coming off last season. There's more questions. So, again, it depends on your definition. But the Eagles didn't Carson Wentz, so they're not going to Carson Wentz.
Let's redefine what that means. I mean, Carson Wentzing somebody. I know the Eagles.
Well, I mean, what's the definition of that?
Yeah, well, I know the Eagles didn't Carson Wentz, but for the sake of the conversation, moving on from a quarterback, taking on a huge.
Well, they could do that, yes, and that's what I said. It's about the definition,
right?
But from my take, and maybe other people had a different take. When I read that, the assumption is, well, the Eagles, Carson Wentz, and it was from their perspective of, oh, they were going to move on no matter what, and it's the exact opposite. They tried, they were going to run it back for one more year, and then if it went poorly, obviously they would have moved on, no question about it. You can move on from any player in the NFL. The minute you think you've got my old favorite Roddy Piper as a wrestling guy promo is, just when you think you got all the answers, they change the questions. Defensive coordinators in the NFL. I went through it with Dante Culpepper. I saw it with Carson Wentz. The minute you think you saw, they're going to make adjustments and they're going to make you look bad. You got to keep evolving. So if Carson Wentz, took that approach, and I don't think he did, but I'm saying Jalen Hurts, I'm sorry. and he continues a downward trajectory and he doesn't adapt, yeah, they can move on. If that's your definition, they can move on from any player. We've seen that. It's easy. What the Eagles proved at that time, and now it looks quaint, but the dead money they took at the time to move on from Carson Wentz was shattered the NFL record. It destroyed it. It set a new standard. Now, again, it looks quaint. So Jeffrey Lurie's already proven he'll take on the dead money if they decide, all right, this player isn't cutting it any longer. That part, again, it all depends on how you perform on the field. And if he performs like very poorly on the field, of course they can move on. Is that going to happen? I don't think so. I don't see any evidence of that. But it's certainly, that part of it's certainly positive.
Yeah, I mean the dead cap hits numbers. Oh, am I muted? No, the dead cap hit numbers are pretty huge, Johnny Mac. I mean, right now they're listed for. I'm on SpotTrack.com. If you look at 2024, 120 million dead cap, and then it says 107 million.
Well, they're not moving on from him this year. Is that the assumption? I mean,
no, I'm saying after the year. So if you move, I mean, if he struggles, I'm not saying they're going to do this, and everybody's going to be like, "Well,
no,
we're talking about
2026 would be the year."
Stuff.
2026 would be the year if he continues to perform poorly. Even if he performs poorly this season, they're going to run it back next season because of that dead cap hit, which is still well over 100 million at that time. In 2026, I think it dips to 50 something million, which sounds outrageous, but again, if you look at the way it's moved from when they did it with Carson, if he performs poorly over that time frame, 2026, it would be in the conversation. But he'd have to perform very, very poorly. And I don't think he performed very, very poorly last year. So I don't see any evidence of that happening. I don't know why anybody would be worried about it. But that's not how I took Carson Wentz. I took it as, well, the Eagles are moving on because he didn't play well, which he didn't play well. He got benched, and rightfully so. But that's not the reason the Eagles moved on. They wanted to move forward with Carson Wentz, and he made it clear that he didn't want to be part of the organization. So, can that happen with Jalen Hurts? Sure.
How bad would it
with
have
anybody?
To be? How bad would it have to be? I mean,
well,
it looks like if you had a terrible season, let's just walk through the scenario. If he had a terrible season, it looks like the only way that the Eagles would move on from him in a viable manner would be a post 6-1 trade where you take on 32 million of dead cap in 26 and you save 9.3 million in 2025. Now there's going to be more hits and stuff, and we'll see how it all shakes out, but I don't see them doing this at all. I think the scapegoat this year is set up to not be Jalen Hurts. It's set up to be the coaching staff. It's set up to be Nick Sirianni. So if it all goes to shit this year, even if Jalen Hurts stinks out loud, they're going to move on from the coach. They're going to bring in a new coach, and they're going to reestablish a new regime. Maybe that regime won't like Jalen Hurts, and that will be the start of the end. But I don't think they're moving on from Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, they're not. There's always stages to any bad situation. And you're right. I mentioned it last year. The scapegoats were there was a layer between Nick Sirianni and the scapegoats, and now that's gone. So now it's Nick Sirianni. If Nick Sirianni's gone, then it's probably then the clock is going to start on Jalen Hurts, but it's not even that year. And there's the possibility of trades and somebody else buying in, as you mentioned. But the bigger impact would be if you want to do the Carson Wentz, you remember all the offensive line issues and all that crap and having the terrible season. If Jalen Hurts, if you want to carbon copy that, say, well, Lane Johnson gets hurt and Landon Dickerson gets hurt, and Jordan, and you got a bunch of poor offensive linemen, and the season gets away from you, and it gets so bad that the final month of the season you bench Jalen Hurts for Kenny Pickett. Yeah, I don't like the odds of that happening. But I guess people, to use Howard's own, if you're scared of that, get a dog. You know, I mean, you can't live your life like that. Oh, if this guy gets injured and this guy gets injured and this guy and he plays poorly and you bench him, I mean, come on, is that Carson Wentzing? No, it's not going to happen.
Johnny Mac says no chance. I'm kind of with Johnny Mac on this. I just do not see it. Look, I mean, I want Jalen Hurts to be better. I'm not happy with the turnovers last year and all those things, but he's the quarterback in Philadelphia, and he's going to be for the foreseeable future. I do not see them making a move from him anytime soon, even in the next, I would say, 2 or 3 years. Maybe if you want to start talking about 28, 29, if he doesn't live up to it, we can start talking about it. But I don't see it at all. I want to welcome, excuse me. I want to welcome everybody in this morning. Screwface, Mr. Perez, what's up, buddy? Mark Holmes, James Carver, Philly Birds and Beers, Cody K, Daz. What's up, everybody? Robert, we South Jersey D. So we appreciate everybody being here this morning. Mark Holmes says, why has there been so much negativity around this team recently, John? The weird part is everybody gets mad at the media, gets mad at us. I don't even think it's us right now. I really don't. I think the team has shown that there are still some kinks in the armor from last year. There are still some cracks. There are still some salt in the wound, if you will. And I don't want to make too much of it, but it's tough to not talk about it. I mean, there was a lot of problems down the stretch last year. There was a team that wasn't playing for one another. There was a team that wasn't communicating properly. Now we're starting to see, it seems like it's still there. Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni stuff. I mean, I don't want to make too much of it, like I said, but it's tough to just brush it to the side after what happened at the end of last season.
No, well, it's a pet peeve of mine because the media, I'm a part of the media. So, I mean, it drives me insane when, we don't have meetings. How many times I tell you, we don't meet every Thursday to talk about, hey, how are we going to take down your favorite team?
Right.
So, if you're mad at Howard, be mad at Howard, whatever. She was asked the question. He said what he said, or I don't even know. But it's one individual. And then Zander asked me the question. I answered the question. That's all I can do. It's not going to happen. I don't even know what Carson Wentzing means. If it means what I think it means, they didn't even Carson Wentz. So I don't even understand what that means. But from the standpoint again, and when we talked about the press conference and people saying we're making more of it, we didn't do that. It was a layup. And people in the Eagles organization, key figures in the Eagles organization, were disappointed per Jeff McClain. And as I said, why wouldn't they be? Why wouldn't they be?
Do you
when
think
you're paying the guy, what's that?
Do you think the Eagles wanted to get that out there? That key people in the organization were disappointed?
No, because to me, and I got the needless speculation. It creates needless speculation quote from a separate team source. It's common sense. Like what are you going to spin?
Well, it's one thing if everybody in the media, if everybody and there we go. I used the thing that's a pet peeve of yours, but all of us, anybody on YouTube, anybody writing articles, all those people are reacting to the Jalen Hurts comment, right? But if you put out there that the team is upset, now Jalen has to be like, okay, I said something wrong. Now they could have that conversation behind closed doors, but if it's just us making a big deal of it, then that's all it is, right? They never have to.
Well, and that's why
there's us being the crazy media like we are. But when you put out the team sources, when you put out key figures, now it's like, okay, it's not just John and Zander on Birds 365. It's not just Mike Gill on 97.3 ESPN. It's not just Brandon Lee Gouton on Bleeding Green Nation. It's Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman. That's where I think it got deeper.
Well, and that's where you got to be, as a fan, if you want to be. It's also, you and I talked about that a little bit off air. If And I talk about it all the time. If you want the cheerleaders, you can be the cheerleaders. Understand who you're listening to. You know, Jep is a reporter. Jep talks to people in the organization. I'm a reporter. I talk to people in the organization. I do both, and sometimes it's difficult. That's Jep's job. If you're talking about some talking head who never sets foot in the building, you can like it, you can dislike it, you can do whatever you want. It's up to you as a consumer. Just understand where the information is coming from. Jeff's information is credible. It's his job to ask people those questions.
Yeah, well
It's
said.
credible.
I'm a talking head, like Johnny Mac said. I don't go to the Novacare complex. I sit here and ask John what I think he thinks on certain things, and I give an opinion as well as John. Like he said, it's tough to bridge the gap at some point, at sometimes, to be a reporter and then to give an opinion and separate the two. But, you know, that's what I am. Now, I want to ask Johnny Mac about – shoot, I just lost my train of thought on it. Sorry. Let me see if I can forgot what I was about to ask you there, Johnny. Sorry, I had a mental lapse. We have Mike Gill coming up, so we'll ask him about these things in a second. So we'll talk to Mike Gill. But, you know, anyway, I have the opinion on it. I think they've given us reason to have opinions on it. And I don't think it's a good thing that this has all happened. So I don't think it's a good thing the way Jalen answered the question. What do you think of, you know, Thomas Mott said something yesterday and Stafford Beasley says it. You know, I don't see much wrong with what Jalen said. He answered the question how Jalen answers questions. Now, we had Angelo Cataldi on with Dan Cilio a couple days ago, who is obviously the king of talking heads, right? He is not a reporter. He's one of the biggest talking heads guys.
Ironically, he was once a hell of a reporter.
He was before he was a talking head, but he is no longer a reporter. Yeah.
No.
Now, he says, I absolutely love what Jalen Hurts said. He gave us truth. He told us that Nick Sirianni is the clown that we all think he is, and he didn't want to sugarcoat it and be a liar, and he spoke his truth, and we should all be praising him for that. So I guess that's the other perspective, is that, you know, you love what Jalen Hurts said because you're not a Nick Sirianni guy.
He didn't say anything. So, you know, he wasn't
speaking his
truth.
failed to.
Yeah, he wasn't speaking his truth. He didn't say anything. And it's his right. I'm not saying it's not his right, but he didn't disparage Nick Sirianni. He just didn't say anything. To a softball question, that was easy. But where I take exception, and I did it with Thomas yesterday, I do it with Angelo now. Jalen answers questions when he wants to answer questions. And he answered a question in that very press conference from me. And he went on for an extended period of time because he wanted that information out there. 95% new offense, 95%. This is essentially why we're struggling in the spring. We're learning a completely new offense from the standpoint of what it was before. And that is some of the context. And by the way, correct context and valid context and meaningful context as well. It shouldn't be a surprise that there's some growing pains, and there will continue to be some growing pains. That's not the end of the world. He does answer questions when he wants to answer questions. Typically, yes, he's very guarded. He's very close to the best. But, you know, it's like Bill Belichick. People that covered Bill Belichick for years say he wouldn't answer anything. But then if you get him on a history topic, he might go on for 15 minutes about long snappers. Jalen answers questions on occasion. So just to wrap it up, as he never says anything, is incorrect.
Mr. Perez says, Zander, what's the big deal about how he answered questions? Ironically, Perez, I don't think it is about how he answered the questions. I think when you couple the response with what happened at the end of last year, it is fair to wonder if the problems that made the team collapse in 23 are still prominent in the organization today. And that could be a look at what might go wrong with the Eagles this year. I don't think it's a problem. I don't have a problem with how Jalen answered the question, but our job is to make sense of what he said. And he said something that created headlines. The headlines are not great. They look like there could be still problems in the organization. I think that's what matters. I don't think how Jalen answered the question is what's important. I think, is it a glimpse into the problems behind the curtains of the Eagles organization? We will find out when the season begins, just 89 days or 79 days away, under 80 now. So we are moving right along. The season's going to be here before we know it. So stay tuned, everybody. Hang in there. I know it's tough. I know we're in the off-season days, but we will get there. Mike Gill coming up next on Birds 365. So stay tuned, everybody. I appreciate you all being here in the chat. Darlene and Richard, Jason A-Team, Screwface, Yale, Underdog. Everybody's still pissed that we're still talking about this. But look, there's Eskin kept the train rolling, and now we're going. Now we're going to keep going with it. Let's get to our break.
It's our fault.
Make sure you guys drop a like on the show. I know you're enjoying the episode, so we appreciate you guys being here as always. And Mike Gill is coming up next on Birds 365.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.
Is the best vacation one that you find, or one you get lost in? One that takes you to new heights, or reminds you to go with the flow? To get your feet wet and your wheels spinning? One that lets you find your own rhythm, or get carried away? Find the best of yourself. Get lost in the woods. Plan your stay in the Wildwoods today.
Win and save this baseball season from Colony Pools and Power Washing, a local company serving Delaware, Delco, and Chester County since 1970. Are you tired of looking at your green house? Is your roof, siding, deck stained green from algae and mold? Let the experts pressure wash your home and take the pressure off of you. Win with Colony Pools and Power Washing. Call them now at 302-762-2250. That's 302-762-2250.
Go passionately. Go fearlessly. Go confidently.
Go Birds!
Go confidently towards your goals with First Trust, Philly's hometown bank for nearly 90 years, and the official bank of the Philadelphia Eagles. We're focused on getting you over the goal line. So go with conviction. Go with trust.
Go Birds!
And go forward with us by your side. First Trust Bank, the official bank of Philadelphia dreams. Oh, and go Birds.
The greatest fans on earth. It's a bold statement, but would you expect anything less from Philadelphia? 58 years of heartache creates a toughness, a grit, a resolve not found in most. Sure, our prayers were answered, but now that we've had a taste, we're looking for more. Pondley Hockey, official partner of the Philadelphia Eagles. EAGLES, Eagles.
Welcome back in, everybody, to Birds 365. About to be joined by Mike Gill. Before we do that, I do want to bring up our buddy James Carver. Got dropped us a super chat. James, thank you. He says, congrats to the No Cheerleader Zone on your 800 and now 800th one show. Had to miss, but wanted to congratulate. J-Mac doesn't cheerlead. It's not going to happen. Sorry, people, but it's not going to happen. Love that from James Carver. Let's go to our man, Mike Gill, for the 800 first edition of Birds 365. Mike Gill, what's going on, man?
Morning, everyone. What's happening? All is well, I think. It sounds like, maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah. Eagles talk. You and Kincaid, you're trying to put a moratorium on Eagles talk. Why is it our problem, Mike, as people in the media that I didn't
say I was. I just said I don't manufacture
Yes.
stuff if there's nothing there.
But I'm sure everybody lumps you in with everybody else. Like Howard today made news, the King, Howard Eskin, and he said, Jalen Hurts doesn't pick it up. They might Carson Wentz, Jalen Hurts.
Yeah.
So you get asked the question, I answer the question. I don't even know what Carson Wentzing means. There's this revisionist history. The Eagles didn't even Carson Wentz. They were trying to work it out. Nick Sirianni was getting interviewed. How do you fix Carson Wentz?
I don't remember Wentz asking out. Or the Eagles wanting Wentz out. I think Wentz just essentially kind of So the odd part is about this though. Normally you would just kind of be like, all right, it's the middle of June, but Eskin does work for the team. I can't imagine the team would be too thrilled with him putting something out there if they thought it was complete nonsense. That's the only part of this that has, I guess, some merit, unless it's just him giving an opinion and he doesn't care if the team doesn't like his opinion. But I can't imagine the team would be thrilled with that opinion being out there because most people associate him as somewhat as a mouthpiece for the team, right?
Yeah, exactly. But Howard will go off the reservation. No, nobody demands that Howard says this and says that. He generally is very positive to the organization. In this case, he wasn't. But then, you're talking about an individual person, not the media, which is, and if people didn't make a big deal out of it, I wouldn't be getting asked the question. So again, it's this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy almost because, hey, it's great that people love this team, that people are passionate about this team, but you wouldn't even be more bored if we didn't answer these questions and pretend it didn't exist?
Hey, listen, this is a town where a show like yours can exist. There's basically no other football town where that happens, where you could have a 2-hour conversation about whether or not Tyler Steen, Matt Hennessy, or Mekhi Becton will be the
Max
right
Sharping.
guard.
Throw Max in there.
And you will get a plethora of comments on an opinion because everybody has an opinion on who should play that position. In this instance, I go back to what I said last week. They had an opportunity to talk about this in January, because they lost, February, March. I mean, you had the opportunity to ask both parties, do you guys get along? Can you coexist? We paid this guy. We've made our commitment to him. We paid him. Can you get along with the coach? If Jalen Hurts says, guys, I think he's a clown, he's a bad representation of our organization, I can't imagine Nick Sirianni would be here. I find it to be completely ludicrous to assume that they just did not talk to Jalen Hurts at all and had any of this come up, that there would be friction between these two. Flip it. I think they asked Sirianni, hey, is Hurts the guy? Should we pay him? I would imagine Sirianni would be like, guys, me and him just do not have the same personality. We can't coexist. I don't know how they think that these two guys got this far without having a respect. They might not like each other. Maybe that's the case. But that be able to play for the other guy, I can't imagine it got this far without them being able to both say, yes, I have no problem with this guy.
Mike, does it give you any pause that they haven't fixed the problems that caused them to go 1-7 down the stretch last year?
Does it give me pause that they haven't fixed them? I don't know that we've identified what those problems were. I would tend to say I was at the Super Bowl. I got a chance to talk to a couple different players and then taking some more information. Brandon Graham said something. We played that audio on my show months ago. He said this on the radio months ago, that they had the coaches in the wrong place. So that wasn't like new news when he said it 2 weeks ago. He said that months ago, that they had the coaches in the wrong place. Britton Covey told me he thought Brian Johnson, they probably would have been better off with a more veteran play caller, that Brian, probably wasn't ready for that job. I think you can make an argument that Desai maybe wasn't experienced enough. Their formula for getting to a Super Bowl was they had Nick kind of doing what Nick does. And if you ask Jalen what that is, he'll laugh and say he does what he does. And I think that's what Nick does. And they had Shane Steichen, who's turned into a good head coach. And they had John Gannon, who's turned into a good head coach, running things. They had Nick doing his job, maximize that, and two strong coordinators. They went to the Super Bowl. I think last year you had Nick doing what he was doing, but probably had to do more because his coordinators were not strong enough. I think they rectified that problem by bringing in two veteran, stronger coordinators. Look, you can look at every, and it's the list season, right? Every list is out there. The Eagles roster from the 33rd team, Pro Football Focus, these are pretty well-respected publications. There are 2 or 3 in almost every one of them. So we're sitting here trying to nitpick, is this team any good? Did they fix anything? Their roster is really, really good still. And they think, and I tend to agree with them, that they have upgraded significantly the coordinator positions, both on offense and on defense.
So just a quick follow-up. Sorry, John. If the roster's that good, and I think it was almost as good, maybe not as good as it is right now, last year, and they go 1-7 down the stretch, doesn't that mean the things that caused them to go 1-7 were off-field related or relationships or something inside the locker room? If the talent is so great, what caused them to go 1-7? And now you're starting to see are the relationships not being built properly? Are the coordinator hires enough to overcome whatever might have caused them to go 1-7? Like you said, we don't know what it is, but we can only speculate. I mean, the players in the field were good.
Yeah, no, and that's a fair question, and that's something that wasn't just simply, hey, we had a bunch of guys on the defensive side of the ball that just didn't mesh well with Desai, their personalities, and now he's gone. Or when we switched to Matt Patricia and him being in the room, that was a problem. And, you had the other half of the guys that didn't get like those 2 guys are gone. So maybe they handpicked some of the guys that they felt were a little bit of the issue. Who knows? I mean, Kevin Byard's not here anymore. He's probably the one guy on defense that was, Fletcher obviously retired. I can't imagine that he was somebody that had issue. Who else on defense? Reddick. I don't think Reddick is a guy who's much of a problem. Although, and I identified this on my show yesterday. One of the reasons why I think this team is set up for better, and I don't know if this was a problem last year, but they went out and identified AJ, Smith, Dickerson, Mailata, and said, hey, we want you here. Here's more money. They went out and identified the core guys and paid them. Everybody wants to be recognized for their work. Hey, you're doing a good job, and here's how we're going to show you. We're going to give you more money. So they got ahead of all that stuff. Now you should have a lot of happy campers going into training camp. I don't know that could be discounted either, but the fact of the matter is, I think the Eagles' message was we needed stronger coordinators. We had the roster. We had the talent. It shows you how important coaching is in the NFL.
Yeah, well, that kind of scares me from this perspective. And by the way, throw Jake Elliott in there. Give Jake some credit for getting the extension after his great season. But when you're talking about the guys who were rewarded, I think if you look at it, to me, the Eagles are generally, and I say it all the time, a very forward-thinking organization. They tend to be ahead of the curve. They tend to be outside of the box. And then there's some disappointing ways where they're just like everybody else. And that, to me, is a just like everybody else situation. Oh, the players are great. The coaches are the problem. I mean, this is a talent-driven league, and I say it all the time. When you have success, it's players first. When you don't have success, it's players first. It doesn't change. So from that perspective, and you mentioned some of those lists, Mike, I saw 33rd team had him as the second best roster. I don't know what PFF had him.
Number 3. PFF had him 3.
I saw Seth Walder and ESPN said they had the best off season. I look at it like, oh, they lost Jason Kelsey and Fletcher Cox. They lost their best pass rusher. They fired both of their coordinators. That might say more about the rest of the league if that's the best off season, to be honest.
That's true. Hey, that's definitely true. And listen, I'm not a blame the coach guy. You know, the Sixers, it's every coach in the world's fault but their players. No, the Sixers players haven't been good enough. That's what it comes down to. But in football, I do think there is more merit to lumping the coaches in. They have a hand in every single thing that happens, every single play. Now, we always say, well, if they call a pass and it works, it's a great call. And if they call a pass and it doesn't work, it's a terrible call. I get that aspect of it, having talent. But the players also have to buy into every single play that's called. And if you have guys who are just not buying into the scheme and their role in that scheme, then you have an issue. The Reddick thing, I don't want to sit here and say that I think I've heard nothing but good things about Reddick. Some people who have played with him tell me, he'll never sit out. He's that good of a guy. Well, now he's not showing up and he doesn't seem happy. Did he just go through the motions last year and just do his own thing? Maybe he wasn't a bad guy. Maybe he wasn't a problem. But maybe he's just not following the scheme. And people are like, hey,
how many times, Mike, how many times have you and I discussed how many guys had career years in 2022? And that was unlikely to happen. Even if Gannon was back, even if CJ was back, even if all TJ was back, everybody came back. It was unlikely to be replicated because so many guys had career years. So that's why I'm a little bit concerned about using Brian Johnson and Sean Desai as a crutch. I often bring this up, because Sean didn't have a lot of experience, and when he would do some wacky things in training camp and like throw out the big nickel look and throw out James Bradbury in the slot, we go, what is this? What is this? Vic Fangio's got Quinyon Mitchell playing dime linebacker in minicamp, and everybody's like, all right, fine, let's go. That's why I worry about blaming coaches. I hear you about messaging because messaging is important, and maybe Sean didn't have that part of it down. And look, you got to move on. You got to move on. But to assume that the magic fix is Vic Fangio and Kellen Moore, I guarantee it isn't. It's the players.
Well,
so they better have the second best roster in the NFL.
And the players have the unique ability or power to buy in or not buy in. That's what it comes down to. It might not be the guy, but it might be the buy-in to the guy. And if I'm not buying into, John, if you're sitting next to a guy and he's not asking the right questions, your mind's like, this guy it's not the right guy asking me. You might be there. You might be good at your job. But if you're not meshing well with the guy asking you the questions or going back and forth, or if he's not bouncing opinions back and forth with you and the conversation just doesn't flow, that doesn't mean you're not really good at what you do all the time, but you might just not be buying into the guy you're paired with. I think that's something with these football players is it doesn't mean that some of them aren't, the right guy. Or I think the James Bradbury one is interesting. They're moving him to safety. We'll see how that sticks. There had been some reports, the guys over at Inside the Birds that suggested that there were people in the secondary that just didn't even talk to Desai. I got to imagine Bradbury. I'm not going to say that they reported that. I got to imagine Bradbury was one of the guys not too happy with his role. Now, you went from a guy who was an all-pro player the year before to basically what we got last year, and now they're talking about moving him to safety. That's why I think this whole story is very interesting, the fact that they've just given up on him. Like, hey, you're not even in the mix for this job, or maybe he is. We'll see when they get to training camp. But was he a guy that just didn't buy in, or does he stink? Like, do we think he just stinks now so bad that he has to play safety, or did he just not really see eye to eye?
I think the safety part of it is the Eagles are trying to salvage something. I don't think he's going to be there week 1 against Green Bay, and they're trying to get something for him.
Right, exactly. But so was he just not happy with his role? Was he not happy with how he was used? Was he not happy with the
Well,
scheme last
I'll
year?
say, because James is, obviously he didn't want to play in the slot. But he's a professional and he did it. I find it, I'll say this, I find it very hard to believe that James Bradbury wasn't talking to Sean Desai. He's just too good of a guy, too professional. Doesn't mean he agreed with him. I know he didn't want to play in the slot. Why would he?
But that's part of some of the thing you're talking about here is, if the coach puts you in a role that you don't want to be in.
Well, I guarantee he doesn't want to play safety. And
exactly.
they're doing
I can tell you that. Yeah.
So, I mean, but it's Bick doing it, and Bick's not doing it. That's how he's trying to generate some kind of value for the guy. But if Bick says, hey, you got to play safety, and he's here, nobody's going to question it because he's Vic Fangio. But the player's not going to be happy. And we saw in Miami with a lot of guys cropping up, and Jalen Ramsey and Xavier Howard and those guys saying, we're press coverage corners. We don't want to play this shit. And they weren't happy. But, he put together a good defense, not a great defense, but a good defense. Despite that, nobody's going to be happy. That, to me, is the biggest fallacy of all. You know that, Mike. I say all the time, Mike Gill and Zander Krause, the next 89 people you meet are not all going to like you. You're not going to like all of them. That's just life. And that's a football team, 90 guys. Nobody likes everybody. Nobody's happy. There's so many politics to it all. So to me, when you boil it down, and it's really the one thing I criticize Jeffrey Lurie for, because I think Jeffrey's been a great owner. But the one thing he always boils down to not reaching expectations is scapegoating people. And some people in that building hate when I use that term. Well, I'm sorry. That's what he does, because that's easy. The easiest thing is to, all right, this guy, this meaningless piece, and I'm not saying Sean's meaningless or Brian's meaningless, but they're less meaningful than, say, the quarterback or the guy who had 19 and a half sacks and was the key part of a 70-sack team, aren't performing up to what they did the year prior. That's the more difficult conversation to have. It's easy to say, all right, you're not on the field. In certain degree, certain guys said that. They're not on the field. And they should be lauded, because you can overcome if you're a great player. You can't overcome if your players aren't playing well if you're a coach, period.
No
Even
question.
If you're Bill Belichick or Andy Reid.
Yeah, and to add, it's interesting because you had Fletcher, you have a guy like Jason Kelsey that were here last year, and if you're discussing guys not buying in with Brandon Graham, who's here still, with leaders like that, some veteran players in the room, then you really have to then ask, did you have the right guys in place? Because if they can't get everybody to buy in, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you have leaders of that magnitude that have been to this organization, have a pipeline right up to the owner, and they can't get the people to buy in, there's where you have the massive change that you ended up getting in the offseason.
Well, and that's part of my fear with this season, because this season, we are entering this season with a very clear scapegoat if it doesn't go as planned. And it's going to be the coaches again.
Sure.
And if Nick's gone,
one of the coaches.
Nick, but if Nick goes, I mean,
If Nick goes, pretty much everybody goes.
Everybody's going to go.
Honest.
And that's what I'm going to.
Except
now,
Stoutland.
We're not there yet. No, Stoutland won't go anywhere. We're not there yet. But if we get to that point, and now, Mike, we have 2 years straight of it being all coach's fault. Like, when are we going to blame the guys on the field? That's what I don't have a problem with it yet, because I think you're right. I think last year there was a buy-in problem. But
then, Zander, you have a problem to some extent, because you have identified the core group of guys on this team to build around. And if you're identifying, that it's the coaches again, and you're sticking with the same group of guys, you have identified that these are the right guys. You have said, and you paid them a lot of money. Your AJs, your Smith, your Dickerson, your Mailata, That group of guys, they're all part of this. I don't know what is the get out of Barkley. I mean, is that a 1-year thing, or does he have to be here 2 before they can get out of that deal? But the quarter of your offense is essentially whoever the coach is this year and next year and down the road with a lot of those guys. So that would be something that would be interesting if they just blew everybody out again and said, well, we're going to take a third role, because we all keep saying how good this offense is. Well, what if the offense struggles again with a different coach, a coordinator running it? Have you then identified that these aren't the right players?
Yeah.
I think we all, I don't think there's anybody out there that thinks A.J. Brown stinks. I don't think there's anybody out there that thinks Devontae Smith stinks, right? Most people say, man, the Eagles have a really good offensive line. Now, this might be the first year that you have some holes on that line, but even so, having 3 pretty identifiable pieces on your offensive line is way ahead where most teams generally are. Now, you have questions at center and you have questions at right guard, but everybody, I think, thinks, hey, we still have a pretty solid offensive line. You went out and paid the running back. So if you have problems on offense again, that's a big problem.
Yeah, and you got to make sure that they address the elephant in the room, which, I mean, if you scapegoat more coaches, I'm going to start to wonder if they are addressing the elephant in the room, or, as John mentioned, as they continuously do, they create a scapegoat and they fire him.
Well, I'll tell you this. It goes full circle back to the start of this conversation. The scapegoat might be the quarterback. If you've identified all those pieces, and you did identify the quarterback, but you get closer, it goes back to what Eskin actually said. Maybe they find a taker for the quarterback and go down that path again if the quarterback doesn't get the job done, because you can't keep getting rid of coaches and you can't get rid of the players that you've already identified. So 2 years into a deal, you might be able to do some gymnastics to figure out how to get out of that deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, if you don't perform on the field, eventually it's going to catch up to you, no matter who you are. In this league, quarterback, doesn't matter what position. It's just a little bit more difficult to move on from a quarterback who's making big money.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, this league, Saquon, everything, 2-year deal. And then it becomes to the point where it's at least somewhat palatable to get out of the contract if you do the right things. And the Eagles have proven that in the past. So it'll come down to performance on the field. But since you brought it up, Mike, I want to ask you about those lists and, how talented this team is. And don't get me wrong, I think they're talented. I certainly think they're top 5. But I don't think it's a slam dunk that they're number 1 or number 2. And I think a lot of people in Philadelphia think that's the case. I do think there's a wiggle room for a floor versus a ceiling. I think the ceiling is turned into, this is going to be the greatest offense in the history of the world, versus probably the floor, similar to what they were last year. Top 10, but bottom half of the top 10. I think they're the 3rd most talented team in the NFC now, behind Detroit and San Francisco. Now, that doesn't mean if everybody plays and everybody has big years that they can't be back to where they were. But are people overvaluing the talent on this team?
Oh, man. The local fans or the national media?
Well, the national is one who's putting them up to. Obviously, the local fans are. I think
Normally,
that's easy.
I do feel that the local fans are skeptical still. Like, I think they always have, well, not always. I mean, there are some seasons where they enter and you're like rip roaring, ready to go. This team's going to go to the Super Bowl. I don't know that the fans are there with this team yet. I think
I'm still skeptical. I'll say that.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of people are still trying to figure. I think a lot of it is trying to figure out what went wrong and not having an identifiable, addressed answer. This is what we felt went wrong, and here's what we did to fix it. Everybody just has their own hypothesis of what went wrong and what they did in the offseason. The moves they made in the offseason, how do they tell the story of what went wrong last year? Well, we went out and got Saquon Barkley. Are we saying that DeAndre Swift stunk? Not necessarily. They went out and changed the coordinators. So are we saying the coordinator stunk? That's a possibility. They went out and, brought Chauncey Gardner-Johnson back. Well, was he such a key figure on the year before that they felt that they had to bring him back? There's so many different stories to be told in the moves that they made, but none of them uniquely address what happened last year because they haven't addressed what happened last year. They never really came out and said, Howie at the end of the year or Nick at the end of the year and said, hey, listen, we understand we lost 6 out of our last 7, and we really felt in that time frame we had communication issues or we had this problem. And then you can see the offseason blueprint and say, well, they said this, and this is what they did to fix it. So I think the fans are kind of all over the place, still trying to hypothesize what went wrong last year. And you know how that happens, John. Everybody thinks they have the right answer. So each individual person's answer is the right one because the Eagles left it. It's like the end of The Sopranos here. The thing just went black, and everybody's supposed to figure out how the thing ended.
I like that.
That's a good.
I might steal that.
Yeah.
By the way, David Chase, by the way, said, come on, people. Yeah, he died. That's the whole point of the ending of The Sopranos. So now we know.
Well, there's a lot of theories out there that
I know, but
he was that he whacked the crowd, the viewers.
Yeah.
This all came up because it was 17 years ago last week, the final episode.
Well, David said it, so I'm going to go with him since he made the
TV series. That's one of my favorite TV series of all time.
But that I'd like your comparison there. You let the fans run with it, and I know people hated that ending at the time, and now it's become this legendary ending. So it worked out in the end. But for the Eagles, hopefully it works out in the end. Mike Gill at Mike Gill Show on X, Twitter, 97.3 2-6. If you're South Jersey down the shore. It's going to be hot. Good place to be down the shore if you can get down there.
We keep hearing there's heat advisories, but we haven't been getting them. It was nice and cool.
Oh, it's nice down there. You got the ocean breeze, so everybody should be trying to get down there. It's going to be hot up here inland, here in South Jersey, where I'm located. But you guys, you're having a dream. We'll see if the Eagles have a dream, but I'm talking about 3 players, Mike. Here, I'm going to give you the 3 players that I got a problem with that I think everybody thinks are superstars, and I just think they're good players. And one I don't even think is a good player. I'm going to say good player, Saquon Barkley, not great player. Good player, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, not great player. I don't know what he is, Devin White. Those are the core 3 guys that I think the expectations are way out of whack for. Way out of whack. Agree or disagree?
I think that's a very intriguing list. I might have to do more diving in on it. Barkley's an interesting one because of the injury issues. You never know. Like when he came into the league, he looked like he was going to be a superstar.
Give me 2018 Saquon Barkley. I'm all on board.
Yeah.
I think it's 2024.
The Saquon Barkley, and I know we got to get ready to roll here soon, but that whole thing is going to be interesting with Kellen Moore. We went back and looked. Zeke Elliott had 300 carries with Kellen Moore in 2019. He also caught the ball 3 straight years, 50 or more. Well, it was like 52, 50, and 47. Is Barkley going to catch the ball 50 times this year? And if he does, what kind of impact does he have? What's this offense look like? Is that part of the 95% of the new offense? Is that Saquon Barkley is going to get 50 catches? He had like 77 targets, Zeke Elliott did in Dallas one year, and 301 carries. So that'll be interesting. But I don't think you're wrong about Barkley yet, but I do think the Giants' offensive line, coupled with the lack of weapons on that offense, certainly did not maximize even a good Barkley. I think it just made him an average Barkley. And if that was an average Barkley, I think you can get a great Barkley here with better weapons around him and better play. So he could be a good player and you could go from good to great. It's hard to go from average to great. And I think in New York, they certainly did not maximize him because he was, what do they say? I am him. He was him in New York. They had nobody else around him. Here, he's got a ton. So I think he can go from good to great. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, jury's out. Played 4 games last year. Was really good here the 1 year as a playmaker. It's exactly what they kind of needed. Maybe he's the kind of guy, though, that needs others around him to bring more out in him. Or are the Eagles counting on him to be the guy that brings more out on others? That we'll see. Devin White, I mean, obviously talent out the yin-yang, but if you're letting a guy like that go, there's questions there. And we've heard a lot of mixed reviews on. I mean, people who have played against him that I've talked to think the guy's a stud. And people who have covered him think, doesn't listen, kind of does his own thing. So we'll see what they get out of him. They all have a ton of talent, but they've only been good for certain reasons. But I think of the 3, Barkley has the best chance because of what's around him. You're a product of your environment, John McMullen.
Yeah. Well, hey, the Eagles called him special. If you're special, you're elevating. You don't need to be elevated. So you and I are kind of on the same page.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think he's going to be elevated by the supporting cast of the Eagles. I agree. He's a good player. I think people mishear me. I say it 100 times. Zander knows. He's a very good player, not a great player. He's going to be elevated. He's not elevating others. That's my opinion.
Mike, last one for me real quick. How confident are you Kellen Moore's the right guy? $175 million offense we got here. Everybody's hoping it turns around and gets going. How confident are you Kellen can do it?
Interesting question there because of what I just laid out. The way he used Zeke Elliott, I think there was a lot of people who thought that he didn't do a good enough job in the run game. And then you're like, hey, 3. One of the things I didn't like about what he did was they had Zeke Elliott towards the end of the Zeke Elliott. Early on, they used him 300 carries, 1,300 yards, 12 touchdowns, 50 catches. He was a huge part of the offense. The problem is when Pollard got there, I don't think they incorporated him enough and made that changeover. So we'll see there. I like Kellen Moore's offense. He had great pieces in Dallas with CeeDee Lamb early in the career. See if he can get and he has more here. He has more here. Last year, a lot of injury problems in LA. It's hard to kind of get a grasp on what they did there with Herbert getting hurt and then Allen got hurt. I called him Keenan McCardle on my show. Someone called me out on it. Remember Keenan McCardle and Jimmy Smith?
Keenan is Justin Jefferson's wide receivers coach.
Yeah. Well, and Keenan Allen is over in Chicago. That team's got a load of weapons over there now. But yeah, I think Moore is going to be a breath of fresh air upgrade over what they've had the last couple of years. Well, last year, not the year before, but last year with Brian Johnson.
Good stuff from Mike Gill. Mike Gill joining us on Birds 365. Make sure you guys listen to him when you're down the shore this weekend. 97.3 ESPN, the best sports talk show in all of South Jersey. Mike, thanks for joining the show, man. We appreciate it.
All right. See you guys.
Thanks, bud.
There's Mike Gill joining us on Birds 365. Always good to talk to Mike Gill. Always brings a good third perspective, good opinions to the show. So good stuff from Mike Gill. Coming up in hour 2, we'll have Brandon Lee Gouton. Coming up next, we'll have one more segment. I'll kick some things around with Johnny Mack. I have a Saquon Barkley question for John.
I'm going to get in trouble again.
Yeah, well, I'm following up on basically what you just asked, Mike. I thought it was interesting, but there is one caveat I want to hit you with. And I want to see what your perspective is. So if you're in the chat room, make sure you guys drop a like on the show. We appreciate you all being here. Goes a long way. I know it's June and we're all waiting to get to training camp. We will get there. I promise. We appreciate your guys' viewership. What's up, Flex and Tanner, Robert, Screwface? Make sure you guys drop a like. Coming up next, Saquon Barkley question. Stay tuned on Birds 365.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.
Is the best vacation one that you find or one you get lost in? One that takes you to new heights or reminds you to go with the flow? to get your feet wet and your wheels spinning. One that lets you find your own rhythm or get carried away. Find the best of yourself. Get lost in the woods. Plan your stay in the Wildwoods today.
Win and save this baseball season from Colony Pools and Power Washing, a local company serving Delaware, Delco, and Chester County since 1970. Are you tired of looking at your green house? Is your roof, siding, deck stained green from algae and mold? Let the experts pressure wash your home and take the pressure off of you. Win with Colony Pools and Power Washing. Call them now at 302-762-2250. That's 302-762-2250.
Go passionately. Go fearlessly. Go confidently.
Go Birds!
Go confidently towards your goals with First Trust, Philly's hometown bank for nearly 90 years, and the official bank of the Philadelphia Eagles. We're focused on getting you over the goal line. So go with conviction. Go with trust.
Go Birds!
And go forward with us by your side. First Trust Bank, the official bank of Philadelphia dreams. Up. And go Birds.
The greatest fans on earth. It's a bold statement, but would you expect anything less from Philadelphia? 58 years of heartache creates a toughness, a grit, a resolve not found in most. Sure, our prayers were answered, but now that we've had a taste, we're looking for more. Pondley Hockey, official partner of the Philadelphia Eagles.
EAGLES, Eagles.
Welcome back in, everybody, to a Wednesday edition of Birds 365. Just 34 days away until the Eagles report for training camp and 79 days away until the Eagles are officially kicking off in Sao Paulo, Brazil versus the Green Bay Packers. Can't come soon enough, but I tell you what, it is going by quicker. So it's going by quick. So before we know it, the season will be here. Johnny Mac, I want to follow up on something you said about Saquon Barkley that I don't know if I fully agree with. I want to give you a chance to elaborate. I do agree with it. I agree with the premise, but I think there's different circumstances, right? You said Saquon Barkley, if he's elite, he'll elevate. He won't need to be elevated. In a way, I think that's true. That's 100% true. When you have a great player, it's A.J. Brown elevates our offense. He's an elite player. But and I'm going to use the forbidden name in comparison here, and don't take it as I'm comparing the two players, but I'm comparing the elite nature of it. Christian McCaffrey got a lot better when he got to San Francisco. Now, I think
his
he
best year was in
them.
Carolina. Yeah, he didn't get better. He had a better supporting cast, so the team was better, and that's the hope here with the Eagles. But no, he elevates that offense. I mean, that's the whole point of it.
Yeah, but the team also elevates him as well. It's a two-way street, I think.
He was better in Carolina. He was younger. He was, less banged up. Part of the reason is he got banged up in Carolina a lot. I mean, his one season in Carolina, people talk about Saquon's 2018 season. He had a whatever it was, 1,400 yards rushing and 1,000 yards receiving. Yeah, I mean, and the whole point, he turned San Francisco into the next gear when he got there. And if Saquon does that, I'll be the first to say I was wrong. But I think that's the difference. Like, he's not getting elevated; he's elevating. In Saquon's case, all of the people who, whatever you want to use, excuse makers, if you want to call it explanations, if that makes you feel better, have at it. All the people that point out, and Mike just did it, and I'm not blaming Mike because everybody does it, the poor supporting cast of the New York Giants, all of it is true. It was a terrible football team, a terrible organization. by the way, one of the most terrible decisions they made was taking a running back at number 2 overall. That's part of the reason why they're a terrible organization. All of it is true. But again, I got to cover one of the best running backs of all time, at least from a pure running perspective, and that's Adrian Peterson. And he was on some bad football teams. It didn't affect him. He elevated one of the worst teams I've ever seen with Christian Ponder playing quarterback to the playoffs. I mean, guys like that. And that's rare. It's not, and ironically, Saquon's a much more well-rounded player than Adrian Peterson, because Adrian wasn't good in pass protection, wasn't a great pass catcher. He was just, probably the best runner since Jim Brown, pure runner. When you talk about power and speed, people talk about Barry Sanders, but this guy had power. He could beat you anyway, and speed, and he had wiggle as well. He had everything from a running perspective. And it didn't matter what the supporting cast was. And that's any position. True superstars elevate. AJ elevates. You see the offense pre-AJ Brown, post-AJ Brown. Last year, you saw it in the playoff game when he wasn't able to play. When he got hurt early,
was putrid in the games he played down the stretch as well. But I get your point.
Wasn't that putrid? The elevate. You can pick out pockets. San Francisco isn't great every game. Christian McCaffrey's on the field. That's just not realistic. But he elevates. AJ elevates. And everybody, every true superstar elevates. They don't have to be elevated. It's not a criticism, because I think Saquon's going to be better than Miles Sanders, who was a very good running back for the Philadelphia Eagles. I think he's going to be better than DeAndre Swift, who is a very good running back for the Philadelphia Eagles. I just don't think he's what so many people think he is. And I think it's been proven over a large sample size. He's a good player. He's not a great player.
Yeah, and looking at the McCaffrey stats, you are definitely right about early Christian McCaffrey. The stats were just absolutely insanity. He had 1,387 rushing yards in 2019, and he also had 1,000 yards receiving.
Yeah,
with 116 receptions. So you are right about that. I didn't realize his stats were that incredible. I mean, he had a lot. I think the reason I was skewed on it was because he had a lot of those missed. He had 2 straight years where he only played.
Yeah, he got banged up.
Yeah, 3 games and then 7 games. And then 22 is when the trade happened, where he played 6 games in Carolina, and then he played 11 games in San Francisco. So I kind of got it skewed. But boy, those first 2 years, you are right. I mean, the team still sucked though, right? So, he elevated.
They're a hell of a lot better than they were now. I mean, yeah, it's all relative, similar to what I brought up. When you can take Christian Ponder to the playoffs, that's good. You see Carolina now in the post Christian McCaffrey era. Look, I hate the comparison. I hate the comparison. I'm not picking on you. Everybody makes the comparison. They say the comparison because he's second to Christian. Everybody says, well, he's the closest thing to Christian McCaffrey. No, he's not. No, he's not.
I didn't mean it as a comparison of the players. I more meant as a comparison of can Saquon show that he's elite by making us better? But I get what you're saying. You're right. I mean, they're not the same player. I don't think they're the same caliber.
And there's actually BLG is going to be on the show, and I think we talked about, because he's the one who found it first, or at least from my perspective on that. Football Insights, and I brought it up yesterday on the show. I mean, they did, a large sample size dating back to 2021, which says this guy is not a difference maker. And so we can talk about that with BLG again. It's just, he's not a difference maker. When you talk about missed tackles, it doesn't matter if you have a bad offensive line. It's still going to give you the credit for making somebody miss, even if you're, gaining a yard. He's not making people miss over a long period of time. I mean, take that up with Football Insights. But yeah,
How does McCaffrey's numbers in those realm compare?
Oh, tremendous. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Everybody you would think would be at the top of the list, Christian McCaffrey, Nick Chubb, even younger players like Bijan Robinson, they're all at the top of the list. Saquon's not middle of the road. He's at the bottom. He's at the bottom with the Latavius Murrays and a Myles Gaskins of the world. Guys who don't have explosion any longer.
All right. Well, who else on this offense elevates the offense doesn't need to be elevated? We obviously identified one in A.J. Brown. The one I have a question on is how do you view Jalen Hurts?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the $1 million question.
It sure is.
And a lot of people, I think Jalen's a very good quarterback.
There's that word good again. You said Barkley was good too.
Yeah, I think Jalen's a better quarterback than Saquon is a running back.
All right. Well, that's a good comp.
I think he's top 10, bottom half of the top 10. I don't think he had a bad year last year. I think he had a bad year when it came to turnovers, and he's got to correct that. If he corrects that, I think he's going to be fine. And history says he's going to take care of the football. And if he takes care of the football this year, I think he's going to be fine. But it's interesting, is he nobody's Patrick Mahomes, so that's kind of put him to the side.
Yeah,
sort of like Christian at running back. And then you start to talk about the Josh Allens of the world, the Joe Burrows, and all those people. I don't think he's with those guys. But I think he's the next tier. And he's already proven you can win with him at a very high level. So I don't have many questions at all about Jalen Hurts that don't involve ball security and maybe relationships with the new coaching staff.
But what about elevating the team? Is he a quarterback you believe that elevates the team, or does he need a team to elevate him?
Well, I think everybody, needs a team to be successful to win a Super Bowl, even Patrick Mahomes. I think everybody needs help. Nobody goes out and wins by themselves. So,
and I know we said we're going to leave him aside, but I'll tell you what, Marquez Valdez-Scantling and Rashee Rice, Patrick Mahomes took them to the Super Bowl and won it. That's elevating a team.
Yeah, well, I mean, he definitely elevates his team, but no one would tell you. In fact, you're talking about it. When you see all these offseason lists, nobody puts Kansas City at the top of the best roster, and they haven't been for, basically in that conversation since probably Tyreek Hill. Not that one player skews it, but they haven't been considered. They have a lot of good players. I say it all the time. Everybody in the NFL has a lot of good players, but nobody, you look at all these lists, nobody has Kansas City at number one, even though they're the two-time defending Super Bowl champions. Nobody has them at number one. They don't have the most talent. So he's a difference maker, no question about it. And I said, when you have a quarterback like that, he increases, how I describe it, your margin for error.
Which is a great way to describe it.
Yeah. And it doesn't guarantee winning. You need, like I say, Tom Brady, the greatest winner of all time. He lost with his best team. That's the best example. His best team he lost with in the Super Bowl, the 16-0 team.
And his best performance he lost in, and that was a separate occasion.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Eagles.
There are other players on the field.
Yeah.
But Patrick elevates, Christian elevates,
AJ Brown elevates.
AJ elevates. True superstars elevate. They don't need to be elevated. Is Jalen in that category? Probably not.
I would say definitely not.
But
I mean,
Yeah.
we've never.
I'll tell you what, he's closer to that level than Saquon Barkley, and I don't think many people would agree with me on that.
I would agree
in
with
the
you on
league
that.
and outside.
I think Jalen's
globally.
close. I'm just saying. I think Jalen is one of the quarterbacks, and line them up. Most quarterbacks are in this realm, but they need a great cast around them.
But his ability to go off schedule makes him closer to that definition than Saquon.
Can you
in my
clarify,
opinion,
John,
in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Can you clarify your? People are ripping you for saying that he's like Gaskins, but I don't think they.
That's
not
what I said.
Yeah, I don't think they listened to what you said.
No, nobody listens.
Please clarify what the stat was or what the metric was that put Saquon in that room.
Yeah, I'm gonna pull it up. So it's from Football Insights. Again, I got it from BLG. BLG found it, and I'm trying to get the chart with. They went back to 2021, and they were looking at missed tackles and tackles after contact. Yardage after contact. And he was in the bottom grouping of the league with the Myles Gaskins of the world and the Latavius Murrays of the world. That was the category they placed him in on the standing. And that's not impressive. I'm not comparing Myles Gaskin to Saquon Barkley. I'm saying he hasn't performed to that level in a very long time. That people think he performs that. Whereas the McCaffreys of the world and the Chubbs of the world are in the position you would assume they'd be in at the top of the list. Saquon's in the bottom, along with Zeke Elliott, by the way, who Eagles fans love it. And that's what sort of BLG kind of pointed out. I'm ignoring, and he made a little quip. I'm ignoring Saquon Barkley on this chart because he was kind of making fun of where Zeke Elliott is in his career. And by the way, Zeke Elliott was great at one point in his career. He is no longer great because that's what happens in the NFL. And I do think that people can't get past 2018, and it is 2024 with Saquon Barkley.
Let's get to our commercial break. Good breakdown, Johnny Mac. I understand what you're saying. I don't think the people in the chat are listening.
No, I'm pretty sure
they're being selective on what they want to hear, which is fine. I appreciate them all for being here. So thank you guys. Make sure you drop a like on the show. We appreciate all the viewership. I know it's June 19th. We're getting through it. Just 34 days away till they report to training camp. 79 days away until the opener in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Let's get to a commercial break. Brandon Lee Gowton, BLG, coming up next on Birds 365.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.
Is the best vacation one that you find or one you get lost in? One that takes you to new heights or reminds you to go with the flow? To get your feet wet and your wheels spinning? One that lets you find your own rhythm or get carried away? Find the best of yourself. Get lost in the woods. Plan your stay in the Wildwoods today.
Win and save this baseball season from Colony Pools and Power Washing, a local company serving Delaware, Delco, and Chester County since 1970. Are you tired of looking at your green house? Is your roof, siding, deck stained green from algae and mold? Let the experts pressure wash your home and take the pressure off of you. Win with Colony Pools and Power Washing. Call them now at 302-762-2250. That's 302-762-2250.
Go passionately. Go fearlessly. Go confidently.
Go Birds!
Go confidently towards your goals with First Trust, Philly's hometown bank for nearly 90 years and the official bank of the Philadelphia Eagles. We're focused on getting you over the goal line. So go with conviction, go with trust, and go forward with us by your side. First Trust Bank, the official bank of Philadelphia dreams. Oh, and go Birds.
The greatest fans on earth. It's a bold statement, but would you expect anything less from Philadelphia? 58 years of heartache creates a toughness, a grit, a resolve not found in most. Sure, our prayers were answered, but now that we've had a taste, we're looking for more. Pondley Hockey, official partner of the Philadelphia Eagles.
EAGLES, Eagles.
Welcome back in, everybody, to a Wednesday edition of Birds 365. Joined now by Brandon Lee Gouton from Bleeding Green Nation. BLG, what's up, man? How you doing?
How's it going, guys?
What's up, BLG? All right, you got to save me because every time I bring up, we talked about this a little bit last week when we had John, but every time I bring up Saquon Barkley, I get in trouble because Eagles fans think Saquon Barkley is, I don't know, Jim Brown or Jim Brown Light. Forget about Christian McCaffrey. So you were the one I saw that posted the graph first, the Football Insights graph, and it was, I finally found it in the break. It was rushing force missed tackles and scrimmage yards per touch from 2021 to 2023. So pretty significant sample size. And the guys on that graph that you would expect to be in the category of being really good, the Christian McCaffreys, Nick Chubb, Breece Hall coming off last season, Jahmyr Gibbs, Aaron Jones, Bijan Robinson, Tony Pollard, Jonathan Taylor, they're where you expect them to be. Saquon Barkley's not in that group. And he's with a group that is not exactly prolific. The Rashad Whites of the world, the Latavius Murrays, the Elijah Mitchells, the Kareem Hunts. And I know you posted it and bringing up Ezekiel Elliott, and you kind of made a nice twist left and said, I'm ignoring Saquon Barkley on this list. Obviously, you're writing for an Eagle group of Eagles fans at Bleeding Green Nation. Are you concerned when you saw that graphic? Because I was like, this ain't good.
I think it kind of fits with what I've been kind of concerned about with the Saquon signing, which again, I think, and you summed it up well when I came on last week. It's not that I think he's going to be terrible and not be able to help this team at all. It's not the argument. It's more of just that, I wonder if he's as good as people kind of think he is at this stage in his career. And here's another stat for you. I tweeted this out back when the Eagles signed him in March. Pro Football Focus has a stat called elusive rating, which aims to measure the success and impact of a runner with the ball independently of the blocking. Because, obviously we hear, well, Saquon couldn't possibly be good. The Giants' offensive line was terrible. And obviously there's some level of truth to that. I'm not saying that's all false. But if you look at earlier in his career, like 2018, 2019, when he was truly in his prime and he was that kind of special difference-making player, he ranked 7th and 12th. So pretty good. And obviously, I guess the Giants' offensive line, you could say, was better back then. But in years since then, since 2020 and moving forward to 2023, he's at 51st, 48th, 49th, 51st. So, that's not a perfect stat, I'm sure. But the point is that it's not just a bad offensive line. I think you look at other metrics and you see evidence here to suggest that he might not be what he was earlier on in his career.
That's BLG. Thank you, by the way. I was getting a lot of crap, and look, I think the guy is a good player. Where I differ from most people is I think there's assumption he's going to elevate the offense, and I think the offense is going to elevate Saquon Barkley. And by the way, I think it could work out very well if he's impactful in big situations and able to close out games as a runner. But I don't think he's elevating. I think he's being elevated. That's my description of what's going on with Saquon Barkley.
I think that's a great way to put it. And look, I think that can be fine. It's not necessarily like the Eagles need him to be Christian McCaffrey with all the other weapons that they have here, but they're paying him to be, a difference-making kind of player. And if he's just average, then that's not really the most wise investment.
BLG, how confident are you that Kellen Moore is the guy that can turn this offense around? We'll talk about, I'm sure, the Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts stuff, but just Kellen Moore, how confident are you he's the right coordinator to turn this offense around? Obviously, a lot of high expectations on this offense.
Yeah, I mean, I like his track record. I think he did some really good things with the Cowboys. I think the Cowboys, scapegoated him kind of to some level last year. Like he was not the only problem, and I know Cowboys offense was pretty good last year, but I don't think Kellen Moore was like the thing holding it back, and their numbers were pretty good when he was there. So I think there's reason to believe that, the Eagles have found something here. And obviously he didn't have much of a long transition into coaching. He kind of just, it all happened very fast for him down in Dallas. And I would think, maybe getting some time away from that environment specifically and getting to work at the Chargers last year. And then, being in another stop, kind of more experience, more humbling, maybe learning some things along the way. So based on his track record, I think there's enough there to suggest that this is a guy who, could have some fresh ideas as Nick Sirianni.
Fresh ideas, yeah.
So
big one. I guess we got to get it out of the way. Trademark the king. If I say to you, BLG, I'm Carson Wentzing someone, what does that mean to you? Because I don't even know what it means, because I don't think the Eagles Carson Wentz.
Yeah, I get what you mean by that. I will say with Howard's comments, Howard obviously, I think it's important to note, has a relationship with the Eagles. He has a Super Bowl ring from the Eagles. So my takeaway from
that Super Bowl ring, by the way,
that's funny. My takeaway from him saying that is that Howard doesn't say that if the organization feels like 100% without the shadow of a doubt locked into Jalen Hurts, no matter what, ultimate confidence. Again, no level of concern. I'm not saying that they're panicking. I'm just saying I don't think Howard says something so like potentially not flattering about Jalen Hurts if there isn't at least some level of concern in the building about him.
Do you think it comes from the comments? And Jeff McClain reported that some key figures were disappointed, and they should be disappointed because that was a layup, and he missed a layup essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it. Sure, I don't think it's the only thing, but yeah, and I mean, that goes to show it's not just like, oh, it's only the media or whoever making a big deal out of this. It's like, no, the team itself has frustration, and they should, because the timing could not have been worse in terms of, if you're looking to
timing was the issue from what I
sure
got, the timing was the bigger issue,
big issue.
Yeah. And because you leave that open-endedness for essentially 6 weeks. But I'm see opposite now. People don't like my takes on Saquon Barkley. I'm kind of the opposite with Jalen Hurts. I think I'm one of the few people, I don't even think he had a bad season last season if you take out the turnovers, which you can't do. But I think his history shows that he's very cognizant of ball security. Dak Prescott had that one season a couple years ago where he had a bunch of turnovers, and then it regressed right back to the mean because that was his history. He didn't turn the football over a lot. I think that's Jalen's history. And if he doesn't turn the football over as much, I think you're back to saying that's a really good quarterback. Maybe not top 5, but certainly top 10 quarterback. I don't have as many questions on the field as others do with Jalen Hurts. Where are you just on the field?
Yeah, I think you're hitting on something there with like the positive regression that Jalen Hurts is due for, at least in the turnover department. So, I mean, I feel good about him overall from a standpoint of this is a guy who we saw who could like win a champion. Like he played at a very high level in the Super Bowl. So I think, you have to like see that ceiling and believe in that. I think obviously he needs to be better than he was at times last year. And as I've talked about before, kind of what some of the things I've gleaned over time were that Jalen was in his camp, even really feeling that he was pulled in a lot of different directions last year, coming off of such a successful season. And as we know, not only from a team level, but a player level as well, dealing with success is part of the challenge in the NFL. So, I think he comes into this season with a better mindset in that regard. So overall, I think there's a lot to feel really good about. He's still only 25, I think, turns 26 soon.
Yeah.
So in a couple months. Yeah.
I think the arrow is very much pointing up, but again, some of these things have to be cleaned up, and I think there has to be a growth going into this season.
BLG, I'm stuck in between a rock and a hard place on these comments, because on one hand, I'm like, look, they're June press conference comments. How much can we actually make of them? I want to say nothing. But on the other hand, I'm like, they went 1-7 down the stretch. The talent on the field was good. There was obviously internal problems of the organization that caused a collapse like that, and nobody could turn around, not the coach, not the quarterback. Nobody could turn it around last year. And now you're starting to see, like, is there still cracks in the armor? Is there still things going on relationship-wise, communication-wise, that might lend to the same problems happening this year? That's where I'm stuck with it. Am I crazy? Does that make sense?
No, it does make sense. I mean, I'm a big vibes guy, and the vibes are really bad by the end of last year. And with Sirianni, being less involved ever, I would say, in the offense and everything, based on all we're hearing and seeing and whatnot, that's a big part of what Sirianni has to get right moving forward, is the culture and the vibe of the team. And to his credit, I think earlier in his Eagles tenure, I think he got that right a lot. And the team did have that, especially in 2021, 2022. So he has to find a way to get that back and have it, the chemistry be really good. And, one of his core values, connection, like that has to be there. And if it's not, then at that point, what is he doing?
Well, how much of a concern then are the comments? Do you think they do lend that there might be problems inside the organization, or is it a whole lot of nothing?
I don't think it can't be nothing. Like, it's more than nothing. Is it less than everything? Yeah. I think it's somewhere in between those two things. But I don't think it's nothing. You can't look at those comments and be like, this feels good. I mean, at the very most, you can be like, it doesn't matter. But if that's the best case scenario, okay, sure. But it's possible that the worst case scenario exists, or at least a worst case scenario than that. And I think that's kind of where we're at, somewhere where it's more than nothing.
I wonder if Mike Tomlin or John Harbaugh get these questions. I'm pretty sure they don't. Every coach gets criticism, but those are probably the two most successful true CEO coaches in the NFL. But they were hired to be CEO. I don't know. I didn't even know if Mike Tomlin was at the time, because Mike was a coming off a big year as a defensive coordinator in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. So maybe they hired. I don't know what the thought process was at the time. That was so off the radar. But there is this, I think, unfair narrative that, what does Nick Sirianni do? Like, is it that weird to be CEO coach? Like, to me, I wrote about this at Sports Illustrated, BLG.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's shown tremendous political talent. In other words, if he went into Jeffrey Lurie's office after last season and said, I'm going to Doug Peterson this thing, I'm going to keep Brian Johnson, I want my guys, Jeffrey would have ordered him, no, you can't do that, you have to do this. But he was savvy enough to say, all right, I got to do something. And he ended up, and I don't know where you are, BLG, but I know nobody believes this, but he hires his coaches. And how he might get candidates, but he's the one doing the interview. Bobby King, kind of confirmed that himself. It's like, you have any other connection? No. Head coach called me. Head coach interviewed me. Head coach hired me. He hired Kellen Moore. He might have wanted Cliff Kingsbury, but Cliff might have wanted too much change on the offensive coaching staff. Most of the offensive coaching staff is back. They're all Knicks guys, with the exception of Brian Johnson and Alex Tanney. When Howie hands off that 53-man roster, Nick Sirianni's still in charge of everything football. And if something goes wrong, he can change it. I think he's politically savvy. I'm not saying it's going to work, but I think he's been neutered, all this kind of stuff. Like Kellen Moore isn't telling Nick Sirianni what to do. Do you believe that or not believe it?
I think what I ultimately care about when it comes to evaluating Nick Sirianni isn't it's not what do you do. It's what do you do well. And I think that part is, been harder to articulate and find, obviously given the collapse of last year. Again, I just gave him credit for, I think, really stressing connection and culture and having that part right in the past. So maybe they can get back to that. I'll give Nick Sirianni credit for that. But in other departments, like I always point to, like, aggressiveness, I don't think he's been quite there. And, I'm taking tush push aside because it's a kind of a gimme play. I'm talking about other situations where, maybe it's 3rd and long and there's a call to be, more aggressive and actually throw beyond the sticks instead of throwing some kind of bubble screen to Kenny Gainwell or whoever.
I don't like the bubble screens. I'm with you there.
So I don't know about, the schematic advantages that Nick Sirianni gives you, and I don't know about the aggressive advantages that Nick Sirianni gives you. So those are kind of the big things I wonder about. And I think 2 departments, well, especially more so with the aggressiveness now that, in theory, less involved with the offense again. But if he's going to be, the CEO, head coach, like, he better really get these, like, 4th down and aggressive decisions right. Like, there's going to be even more onus on him to really, again, give his team an edge.
BLJ, coming out of the spring, where are you most concerned about with on the roster? I mean, I think the roster looks pretty good. I know the defense obviously isn't as loaded as the offense, but they certainly addressed some of the issues from last year. A lot more depth in the back end. Linebacker still obviously the big concern, but I have concerns about some of the depth on D-line after losing Fletcher Cox and Hassan Reddick. What are you looking at as somewhere that you think the Eagles might address going into the training camp here or after training camp?
I'm not really concerned with the roster, like you said, just because I think the talent is so good. Not to say it's flawless. Every roster, though, has holes in it.
Yeah,
so
right.
It is what it is. But I think the pass rush still, I mean, it's just such a swing to me, as we've talked about here on the show before. I think it has the potential to be pretty good. If Nolan Smith takes a leap, Brandon Graham has something left in the tank. If Bryce Huff pans out as a full-time player or more of that than he's been to this point in his career, if Josh Sweat can, rebound from being ice cold at the end of last season. There's just so many ifs there, though, is the problem to me. And again, even if things kind of do pan out for the most part, I just kind of wonder about the depth because, the Eagles had a better outlook, I would say, at edge rusher than this time last year. And even so, didn't have enough of a rotation where guys were getting tired and everything. And obviously we'll see too how Vic Fangio utilizes or doesn't utilize that rotation. So I think the pass rush is what kind of, I still think about.
It's list season, as we always say, BLG. Everybody's got a list. One of the most recent lists I saw was ESPN. Seth Walder rated the off seasons of everybody. Eagles were number 1. And I'm like, man, they lost. You just mentioned the pass rush. They lost a guy who had 19 and a half sacks a couple of years ago and wrecked the NFC Championship game for a 2026 3rd-round pick if the Jets are not the Jets and screw up the potential contingencies. Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox retired. They had to fire their coordinators. If this is the best offseason in the NFL, how bad is the rest of the league?
I do think there's a little and look, I'm not going to say that Howie Roseman doesn't deserve credit. I think he's built a pretty good roster, and obviously the Eagles have had a lot of success over the past several years. But I do think there's a little kind of like, well, Howie Roseman does it again kind of thing where he makes a move and it's splashy and generates headlines, and therefore it's automatically good and gets praise.
Yes.
And some of that's to Howie's credit.
Going back to our first question. Yes.
In terms of politics and working, I'm sure, the media landscape as well as the other GMs and everything. So, I give Howie credit for all that. That's part of the game. and I'm not saying again they deserve an F, but I'm just saying I think things get juiced up a little bit more maybe than they should.
And Howie deserves that reputation.
Sure.
I don't disagree with that. But when we talk about talent, a lot of the best roster lists are out there. I think the Eagles as 33rd team had them as the second best roster. PFF had them as the third. I think they got the third best roster in the NFC. Now, that still might be third. I got them behind Detroit and San Francisco. Where would you place the Eagles, whether it's in the NFC or the league as a whole, when it comes to best rosters?
Yeah, I would say they're right in, the power players of the NFC. They're like, they're right there. I think you're kind of splitting hairs at some level when it comes to, like the 49ers or the Lions or the Cowboys. I think, they're all kind of in the same kind of conversation. You can take your pick. And obviously, the roster being what it is great and all, but the quarterback is going to swing ultimately many things here. So, but yeah, I mean, I think the roster is in amazing shape to the point where, if the Eagles fail this year, it's not, I would have a hard time believing it's because Howie Roseman didn't get enough talent for this coaching staff. I think it would be, as again, going back to the Sirianni of it all, what are you doing with this talent? Are you getting more out of them than you reasonably could? Are you getting at the baseline level of what you should? Or are you getting less? And I think, the onus again is on Sirianni to get more, even more somehow than what he has to really get them to maximize the talent he's being given to work with.
Yeah, and to give Howie even more credit, the biggest nod to him that I think we could give is he has transitioned now from the Wentz era wasn't that long ago, and that was a completely different team. Now he's transitioned to where we have all of our core pieces, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Jalen Hurts, Landon Dickerson, Jordan Mailata, all those guys on offense. And then you're going to start seeing it on defense with Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, some of these younger guys coming up, hopefully Quinyon Mitchell in the next couple of years. He's really built the foundational pieces of the roster. When you look at a foe in the NFC East, it's like me and John talked about 1-year deals, right? Eagles have like Mekhi Becton on a 1-year deal and Devin White. Dallas has their quarterback, their wide receiver one, and their starting edge rusher on in the final year of their contract. Like, we're just in a good spot in terms of having the core of our team locked up for the future. And I think that's the biggest credit to Howie Roseman.
Yeah, I mean, you would not see what's going on in Dallas happening with Howie,
No,
at least
No,
in a way where
I don't. In a lot of ways, I don't get what Jerry Jones does when it comes to building a roster. But that's one of the advantages the Eagles have over everybody, not just the Dallas Cowboys. At Brandon Gouton, make sure you follow BLG on X. Read them at bleedinggreennation.com. I saw you did your former Eagles players on the rosters around the NFL. Every single team in the NFL has a former Eagle, except who? PLG?
The Dallas Cowboys don't have a former Eagle.
Yeah, that's how much they hate the Eagles, evidently. I love it that you even put the United Football League ex-Eagles.
Who's the best former Eagle that's out there right now that's on another team?
I think, I mean,
Ron LeBlanc.
he's still in the CFL. I mean, my mind jumps to Reddick, but I was trying to see if there's another one out there that I'm missing. I mean, you could say Isaac Seumalo too. I think
he's
fair,
right?
Fair answer too.
Can you tell Andy Waddle's in Pittsburgh? My God,
yeah. Between that and then obviously the Bears with Ian Cunningham, former Eagles executive, they have a lot of former Eagles in there. The Colts, Shane Steichen, although some of those players weren't even here when Shane Steichen was here. And then the Commanders too. They have 5 former Eagles, including Zach Ertz. So there you go.
I'm with you with Deontay Burnett, who was on the Arlington Renegades.
Yeah,
dude's like, I feel like he's as old as me, but he's only
that's crazy. He's like
26.
That's nuts. He was on the Eagles in 2020.
Yeah, he's been around for a long time. The great McLeod Bethel Thompson. He's one of my favorites. I had forgotten Brett Boyko. Speaking of the Edmonton Elks, our buddy Rick Saratella is a scout for them. I'd forgotten Brett Boyko. So well done. Everybody should check that out at Bleeding Green Nation. BLG's got every single ex-Eagle. He mentioned Ian Cunningham, the Chicago Bears. They got 7. Andy Weidel, 8 former Eagles on the Pittsburgh Steelers, including maybe the best, as BLG said, Isaac Seumalo is still a really good player. Nate Herbie's out there.
Yep.
Then you got the Graylin Arnolds of the world, the Kyron
Hargrave.
Johnsons.
Someone brings up Hargrave in the chat. That's a good one too. He's
of
a good
course.
player.
Great
Oh
call.
yeah, he's
Yeah.
very that's a good one. That's a very good one. San Francisco, great interior pass rusher. Ian Book and Carson Wentz, Kansas City. Andy Reid loading up
Yeah,
on
how about that?
ex-Eagles quarterbacks. They need a quarterback badly, Kansas City.
Yeah.
So check that out at Bleeding Green Nation. Always good to catch up with my guy BLG. And hopefully you're not going on vacation, and we'll see you next week.
I think I'll be here.
All right.
All right, BLG. Thanks for joining the show, man. We appreciate it.
Thanks, bud.
There's Brandon Lee Gouton joining us on Birds 365. Good stuff from him. Good insight into the conversation. Johnny Mac, I get why we're doing it, but boy, I am ready to put the Jalen Hurts, Nick Sirianni press conference stuff to bed. I really am.
Well, all right, I get and now I'm getting killed with the Barkley stuff. I love the guy. People don't listen. Personally, I'm the same way with James. James Bradbury is one of my favorite players in the NFL, one of my favorite players to deal with, one of the best guys you're ever going to meet in professional football. And I'm not going to tell you he was an all-pro last year because he didn't play well. I love Saquon Barkley, but I'm not going to tell you he's a superstar because he's not. I'm sorry. I wish he was. It couldn't happen to a nicer guy.
You think he has an impact on the team, though?
Oh, yeah. I think he's going to be a good player.
Like, here's where I look, right? Like, and we've talked about, I mean, Saquon's one of the guys that we've really talked about a lot this offseason, but I view red zone. Like, is he going to be a big red zone back where they can rely on him in the red zone, or are they not going to use him in that realm? When you
I hope not, from the standpoint of Jalen Hurts is so effective down there. Like, I don't want to take that. I mean, the Eagles have been one of the best red zone teams in the NFL because of Jalen Hurts' ability to run the football inside the 10-yard line. I mean, to take that off, we talked about the meshing of the offense. Originally when Nick, and I didn't like the convoluted approach to that thought process, and my presumption there is that Kellen Moore is a good offensive coordinator. He's going to figure out on his own what Jalen Hurts does well. Well, what Jalen Hurts does, maybe one of the best things he does, is get the ball in the end zone from the standpoint of 28 rushing touchdowns over the past 2 seasons. 28.
You think taking some of that stuff off Jalen Hurts, though, would help him? I'm with you where I'm like, I don't want to change the quarterback. I want you to get the best Jalen Hurts. I don't want you to turn him into Brock Purdy. But I do wonder if they took some of that stuff off him, it would help him in other areas of the game, like throwing the football, finding people in the middle of the field. Maybe not. But,
I've been pretty consistent on this. As long as he's here, I'm going to take advantage of what he does best. I don't care about shelf life. I don't care. I can't legislate injuries, and include the playoffs. 33 touchdowns over the past 2 years, running the football. 33.
That's absurd.
I'm not taking that from the offense. I don't understand this thought of, you got to be traditional. You got to turn it around. You got to be under center and hand it off to a running back. He's got 33 stinking rushing touchdowns. A lot of that is tush push, but a lot of it is RPOs. A lot of it is just taking it in because he's that good of a runner inside the it's one of the biggest advantages the Eagles have as an offense, because it's so difficult to defend everything in those close quarters when you got the quarterback pulling the football. Why would you want to take that away? if they do, I'll be criticizing Kellen Moore. You can guarantee that.
You think the tush push lives this year, Johnny Mac? I'm skeptical. I got to be honest on the tush push. I don't think it.
Why wouldn't it? Why
Well, because
wouldn't it?
I think people are underrating Jason Kelsey's role in it.
Well, look, Jason's great, and I do think it's going to be a little bit more difficult from the standpoint that you're not going to have that veteran deference, and he would steal, 18 inches or whatever by moving the football, manipulating the football. That's a big deal. But if you go back to Carson Wentz, totally different.
Yeah, he was very good at it.
I didn't know. He was tremendous on quarterback sneaks. Jalen Hurts is going to be tremendous. I never gave a shit when the Eagles when people were concerned that they were going to ban the tush push because they were going to be good at it anyway. And I think the tush push is just sort of window dressing. And it seems to antagonize other teams and other fan bases, and maybe that's good. Maybe it doesn't matter. With a normal quarterback sneak, they've been tremendously successful and will continue to be tremendously successful because of the quarterbacks, Carson Wentz and Jalen Hurts.
Robert brings up a good point too. Landon Dickerson has a big part in it as well. You have a line like that. I guess it's tough to stop that no matter who's the center, I guess. I mean,
here's the dirty little secret. You have a shitty offensive line and the Eagles have the farthest thing from a shitty offensive line. If they had a shitty offensive line, and they never will with Jeff Stoutland, they'd still be good at quarterback sneaks because of the quarterback.
Really? You think so?
Oh, yeah. Dude can squat 650 pounds. I mean, he moves.
Yeah, I know, but that doesn't mean he's going to move an NFL defensive line backwards.
He's moving people. He squats more than most defensive tackles. He's moving people. Yeah, he would be successful no matter what on the quarterback sneak. And that's why I never cared that it was going to harm the Eagles at all if they actually banned it. In fact, the opposite has happened. Other teams are trying to copy it, and they're not successful. And they're not successful because the quarterbacks can't do it. Doesn't matter if they're getting help. They can't move it. He can move it. So as long as you got Jalen Hurts, you're going to be good on the quarterback sneaks.
Yeah, I think they're going to use it still. I don't know if it's going to be as prominent of a play like it was the last couple years.
Well, again, the tush push part of it is they're going to use the quarterback sneak a lot. And I assume they're going to still use the aesthetic window of people pushing. But I think that's more window dressing. I don't think it's that important. They're going to use the quarterback sneak. If it's 4th and 1, they're going to use the quarterback sneak because they're good at it. Yeah, I don't see that changing at all. Why would you change that? Very similar to just what I said about their red zone running game. Why would you want to change that? If you do, you got to start looking at Kellen Moore and saying, what are you doing? Why are you trying? If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
We went off on a red zone tangent, but back to the Saquon Barkley thing. Then where is his biggest impact this year? I mean, I view him as a guy that's going to take some of the pressure off Jalen Hurts. In whatever way that is, we will find out. But I think adding him to the backfield hopefully takes some of the onus off of the quarterback to have to make every single play. I don't know if they're going to use him like that, but is it bell cow back? Is it run the game, run early to beat the opponent down, similar to how they did in 22? Or is it throw the ball early and run late? There's a lot of different ways they can use Saquon Barkley. It'll be interesting to see how they do.
Yeah, I think he's going to be better closing out games. If they have a 10-point lead, 4-minute offense, I think he's going to be better with that. I think he's going to help them in pass protection. He's a better pass protector than what they've had. And I think he's going to be a good player. And I think, but for people looking for volume, I don't think they're going to get what they want. Hopefully, I think I think with Saquon Barkley, I think the standard should be impact on the game. And by that, I mean, is he making a big play to help them get over the finish line? Not about, oh, he's got to have 70 catches. If you're expecting 70 catches, you're going to be disappointed. If you're expecting 1,600 rushing yards, you're going to be disappointed. Can he close out a game? Can he convert a big down? Can he pick up, talk about intangible? Can he pick up a blitzer where maybe Miles couldn't and Kenny Gainwell, DeAndre Swift couldn't over the years? I think he's going to help the team. I just don't think he's going to elevate the team. I think the team is going to elevate him.
Yeah, I'm looking at Saquon's stats. The most stats he ever had in the receiving game was 721 yards. That was his rookie year, though, in 2018. He's obviously not the same player. That was prior to the injuries. And, after that, it's been a pretty consistent fall. If he's only averaging probably about 300 yards a season in the passing game. And I don't even know if he's going to get that. I think he'll get that, but I don't think he's going to get much more than that.
No, I don't think it's going to be a big part of the passing game.
Yeah.
And I don't know why the Eagles would be holding everything under wraps in minicamp, but if they are, God bless them. But it was mainly a decoy in the passing game early on. We'll see if that changes. But that's when you have receivers like A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert, that should be the goal. Like, why are you, those are the guys you want to get the football to in the passing game. So it should be more of a decoy aspect to it. And then if you can come back to it in a big spot, again, impactful, because people are focused on AJ and Devontae, and you can get a big play on a wheel route, to help you win a game. Those are the things I think you should be judging. When the plays come to him, does he make the plays? Everything we criticize Quez Watkins for. Not going to get a ton of volume, but when the plays come to you in the passing game, do you make the plays?
I know you're not a stat guy, Johnny Mac, but how much yardage do you think, all-purpose yards, you think Saquon will have this year with the Eagles?
Oh, about 1,300 rushing if he's healthy. Low 300s in the passing. So if you're at 1,600 all purpose, I think that's a really, really good number. Really good number.
Shout out to King Eagle in the chat. He dropped this in right before you said that. 1,300 plus rushing, 300 to 400 yards receiving. Realistically, if he can't get these numbers, it's a failed signing. I do think the situational aspect of it matters. Like if he gets less than that, but he makes big plays in big moments that close out games.
Yeah, it wouldn't necessarily be bad if it were 1,100 and
the 1,100 were meaningful 1,100 yards. That won games or closed out games or picked up a 3rd and 3 when you needed it late in the game, something like that. Like I think there's.
But I don't care about the contract. Like they signed the contract.
You've schooled me on that where I don't.
And the contract is not going to hurt them moving forward, even if he fails as a player. So I don't care. Is it non-traditional for the Philadelphia Eagles, the typical way they do business? Yes. And that's fair to point out because, Howie has kind of contradicted himself. And especially when you talk about a player and he went through this with DeMarco Murray, a player with a ton of touches. He's at 1,500 touches or just about there his entire career. That's a lot of touches. And generally, the descent starts at that point, not an ascent. So all of that stuff you can rightfully ask questions about, like why and how he's explained it. He thinks this player's different. He thinks this player's special. He thinks this player's going to be a weapon in the form of players that like Christian McCaffrey. I disagree with Howie Roseman. That it's all about evaluation. He thinks this guy's a star and going to elevate people. I disagree with him. Normally, I'm very on board with Howie in normal decision making. I think he's.
I think Howie can be wrong about that and still be a successful signing.
It'd still be fine.
Right.
Still, he's not going to be a bad player, as BLG explained it. Not going to be terrible. He's not going to be bad. He's going to be a good player. But I think that's all he's going to be. Good player.
Wrapping up a Wednesday edition of Birds 365. If you guys are in the chat, if you could drop a like on the show, it's the best thing you can do to help us grow. So we appreciate that. Off-season blues here, everybody. We are getting through it. 34 days until the Eagles report to training camp. 79 days until they kick that football off or receive the kickoff in Sao Paulo, Brazil versus the Packers. I'm getting excited. Johnny Mac's getting me fired up for Saquon Barkley and this Eagles offense. Let's go to our super chat. James Carver dropped 2 of them today, so we appreciate that, James. He says, Zander and J-Mac, can y'all at some point do a masterclass on O-line protections? Because people overlook how those calls affect clean operations. There's that word, clean operations, and Hurts effectiveness. I would love to do that with Johnny Mac. Johnny Mac.
And that to me is the biggest part of Jason Kelce. I know we got to go. Maybe we can talk about that later in the week. But yeah, I mean, that's where Jason really set himself apart, setting up all the protections. And now what's going to be interesting is that going to go directly to Cam Jurgens? Does Jalen Hurts got to get more involved? That creates a lot of issues, sliding protection where it's supposed to go, especially when you're making changes at the line of scrimmage. That's where the Eagles, are going to miss Jason Kelce the most, I would say.
I want to thank. I agree with you on that. By the way, I think it's going to be a big thing to watch for this year. Is what we lose with the intangibles of Jason Kelce as well as not just the physical stuff. But I want to thank everybody for being here this morning. James Carver drops us 2 super chats. Check that out, James. We appreciate that very much, man. Everybody in the chat, I appreciate you all. We got some hate today, but that's all right. I love all of you guys.
Oh, I'm used to it.
I appreciate you being here. I really do. You guys make our channel possible. So I'm not. Even if we disagree on some things, I'm sorry that's how it goes, but that's the nature of the world. We all have different opinions. We all have different thoughts, different beliefs, different systems. I'm here to respect yours as well. So thank you guys all for being here. If you could drop a like on the way out, we appreciate it. Johnny Mac, great show today, brother. We will talk to you tomorrow on Thursday's edition.
All right. Sounds good. Have a good day, everybody.
Have a good day, everybody. Stay cool out there. See you tomorrow on Birds 365.
You've been listening to Birds 365, the destination for the passionate Eagles football fan who bleeds green. If it's Eagles football, we're talking about it. Debate, inside the locker room, and guests that are some of the greatest football minds from around the region. We hope you enjoyed the show. We know we had a blast. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with us on social media at JAKIB Sports. See you next time on Birds 365.